Welcome back to Pink Slip Pavilion. It's Wednesday, which means we're back with another layoff story. And if you're not already subscribed or following, make sure you hit that button so you never miss a story. This week, we have the inspiring Jennifer Butler sharing her story from contained to creating.
This pink slips the start, not the end.
Jennifer, welcome to Pink Slip Pavilion. We're so excited to have you here and have this conversation. As you know, we believe that pink slips can actually turn into power moves depending on how you approach them. So we're excited to hear your story. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to tell this story.
Have you told this story publicly before?
Couple times.
Okay, well, let's dive into it. So, most importantly, the question is, have you ever gotten a pink slip? That's the qualifying question.
Yes. In fact, I'd love to tell you about two. One was in college, and I feel this is a little more humorous, but I coined a term adopted among my friends of quired, which was the merger of quit slash fired. And so I was working at a bagel shop, and the policy at the bagel shop was it was a fixed schedule. And if you couldn't make your shift, you had to find somebody to cover for you. And it was one of those weekends. I had family coming in town. I wasn't able to find anybody to cover for me, and I was not going to miss out on my family being there. So I remember saying and talking to the manager and just saying, I won't be here. So you can take that as I'm quitting, or you could take that as I'm fired. I guess I've been quired. And so that was my first, I'll call it a backdoor pink slip. But then most recently in early 2025, I was laid off, or my role was eliminated from a big, massive corporation. And that has been a truly life-changing experience.
I bet. So, let's dive in. Let's set the
Okay.
stage.
Yes.
Early 2025. What's going on in life? What are the circumstances around the layoff?
So early 2025, I was a few months into a lot of change and chaos, and kind of upheaval in my role. There had been a series of reorganizations and reductions in force, and just kind of every time you turned around, someone was leaving or people were shifting chairs, etc. And so I had started to think, I don't think I'm going to be here for the long haul. Fully believing I need to get my resume updated. I need to start putting out some feelers, but thinking it was going to be me finding something else and going to that thing. And then it was the end of January. My daughter, 7 at the time, almost going on 8, she's almost 9 now, happened to be home from school that day. She didn't feel well. So I was triaging some work stuff, taking care of my daughter, and went into what I believed was a budget meeting, because with all the chaos, we hadn't had a solidified budget yet. And there was a lot of triggers we needed to pull based on it was the end of January. And so I had the infamous moment of I jumped into a budget call. There was approximately 13 seconds of awkward chit chat, and then poof, up pops the HR face. And working in human resources, working in the talent space, you obviously immediately know what that means. And I must have made a face. I must have flinched or something, because the woman I was working for at the time kind of stopped and went, like, just nodded and smirked, like, yeah, that's what's happening. And it was just wild. So that was within an hour, I was done. I was lucky in that my role ended at that time, but I was going to continue to be paid and get my benefits for several months. And so it gave me the opportunity to figure out, what do I want to do next? What is next? And the next week, that same daughter who didn't feel good that day was officially diagnosed with pneumonia. And so I spent that first week of being unemployed in full-time mom mode. And it was very interesting because I distinctly remember sitting on the couch with her. She was half asleep with her head on my lap, and I was doing the half scrolling through my phone. And every job posting I looked at gave me the ick. I was like, I just don't want to do this again. I don't want to go back into that. I don't want to have another person smirking on the other side of a call, right? And that was when it was early February. That was when I decided to start my own company. And so February 14th, I officially said out loud I was going to start Primrose Leadership Solutions. And then I think it was the 16th or 17th that I claimed the LLC of Primrose Leadership Solutions.
I love it. I love it when people take back their power. But I
Yeah,
want to kind of double click on a couple of things you said. And
definitely.
one of those is the experience of thinking you're joining one meeting and then getting blindsided. There's a lot
Mhm.
of people listening to this that have experienced that. I've experienced that myself. But
Mhm.
I also want to call out being able to be a mom full time because I think as women, that's something that a lot of moms feel guilt for when their children are sick. I'm not a mom, so I can't speak to that. It's just an observation from conversations I've had, friendships. But I think that that's such a unique thing that happens sometimes when you go through a layoff and all of a sudden you have this abundance of time and you also have children who need you. So I just want to zone in on that because I think that that's a beautiful moment that you wouldn't have had.
Yeah. And to be very honest, had she not gotten that sick that week, I don't know that I would have been pushed fully on my rear sitting on the couch. And so that might be the most advantageous case of pneumonia our family's ever seen.
Wow.
But it forced me to stop and look back and say, oh wow, if I was still at my previous job, I would have been daughter's head on my lap on one side and laptop trying to dial into meetings or respond to things, try to keep, everything moving. And I didn't have to in that case. And I wasn't, it didn't mean I was stepping away and going to come back to this avalanche of work that I didn't get to.
Hmm.
And what it really did was color then how I wanted to show up and what was important to me in my own company and creating my own space. And I'm a full-time single parent by design. That was the choice I made. And so it hasn't necessarily been the guilt because I don't have another option. I have to pay the mortgage and parent, but the opportunity or the ability to be more in control and to not kind of be looking over my shoulder all the time of who noticed I was away or did my team's light stay green. That kind of stuff is so refreshing to not have on my plate anymore.
I think a lot of women are going to relate to that in a very big
Yeah.
way. So I
Yeah.
want to go into mindset because we've kind of dabbled on it a little bit, but in that moment in time, what was your mindset as you were going through this?
So the first thing I did was called my mom and said, I need you to get down here. My team is going to find out some news in about an hour, and I'm not going to be able to be a mom and take care of my team. And so my first reaction was to take care of the people that I had created great working experiences with, great friendships with, great relationships with, who I knew were going to have a reaction to this news. So that was my first mindset. The next few days, my mindset was, ooh, let's go to that workout class I can never go to, or let's take that extra long walk. And I really did treat the next couple days like a vacation. Once I got about a week into it, the phrase I adopted or that I started using was, it was all relief, no grief.
Mm.
And so anytime, people, you'd jump on a call or you'd run into somebody and they would have heard the news and you'd kind of get the head tilt and what are you doing? I was immediately saying, oh, I'm amazing. I am all relief, no grief. And to be honest, I got there before I even knew what was next. And I think a big part of that was just the relief of not having that corporate environment that was deeply flawed anymore that I was going to have to manage through.
I think a lot of people will also relate to that experience.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what you said about looking over your shoulder and is the team's light green, a lot of people will also relate to that and that mindset, that stress and anxiety that really isn't necessary, but does
Nope.
often come with the corporate environment.
No, to be honest, I don't know that I would have articulated to you that it existed until it went away.
Yeah.
And I had been 25 years in corporate America at that point. To me, that was just the way it is, and that was just normal. And that's not to say every role and every team and every company was that way, because I've definitely had experiences where it wasn't. But I exhaled in a way that I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. And that was huge. That was huge.
So let's talk about now the
Yeah.
transition that's happened. So mindset then, very powerful. You really spoke into existence what you wanted. But
Mhm.
now looking at where you're at, your mindset, how has that evolution happened and where are you now?
It is so funny. Apparently, just recently, my brother is 7 years younger, classic man of a few words. He will tell you it's because he has two sisters and nobody ever let him talk. But um, he apparently just recently made a comment to my mom about, oh, yeah, you can tell Jennifer's so much happier. And again, I would not have described myself as unhappy, and I still don't look back and think it was unhappy, but I am so much more, on a mindset wise, settled. I feel so much more in control, which is funny because my next paycheck is less guaranteed now than it was a year or two, well, 2 years ago. But I feel like I have all the tools and I can pull the levers and make it happen in a way that I didn't have. I also feel like mindset wise, I'm very committed to the balance our family has.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that I'm not working late nights. Sometimes I am, but the trade off to that is I'm also coaching softball and I'm making a grocery store run at 9:30 on a Monday. The grocery store is a delightful place on a Monday morning. Like, and I, yeah. Um, and so my mindset is I have so much more agency over how I spend my time and my outcomes of that time. Um, and then the biggest validator is my daughter notices. My daughter comments a lot of, oh, I'm glad you don't have that job anymore. So
That's powerful.
huge, huge. Um, you mentioned the guilt around parenting. We had a moment, it was probably about a month after I lost my job and before I figured out what was going on, where my daughter needed money for something for school. It was like $3. And she specifically said, well, can I just get the money out of my piggy bank? And normally, corporate me would have said, yeah, I'll figure it out after bedtime, because the idea of doing anything else would have just, it was too much. And instead, I found myself saying, well, yeah, why don't you go grab it? We'll count out the change together. And it wasn't until we were sitting there doing that that I realized I wouldn't have had the mental, emotional bandwidth to do that before. And I did. I stopped and looked at her in that moment. And I said, I think better mom since I stopped doing that job. She didn't get it. Like, she's not connecting that to it, but I definitely can tell you I am a better mom than I was 400, 500 days ago.
Well, that's a huge blessing. And I think that's a great transition into blessings and what blessings you would have missed out on had this not happened in your life, this shakeup.
I would not have, gosh, a couple things. I would really have missed out on the opportunity of seeing the relationships I've built over 25 years pay off for me. The number of folks that as soon as I said I'm doing this, that set up time, set up meetings, not just to be curious. And those conversations were great. But the people that literally came to the conversation and said, tell me what you're going to be doing. Okay, great. Here's a list of 5 projects I have. Which of these is most exciting to you? And and the validation that that gave me as an individual of the relationships I built are strong, the skills and the credibility I have, that was huge. So that's one, just you do all this work over your life and to see it pay off into checking account deposits is awesome. The other blessing, and this goes beyond just the parenting, but actual tangible time and time away with my child. And so I was working on a corporate PTO schedule before. And so as a working parent, when you start factoring in school days out of school and general holidays, et cetera, there's not a lot of time to go do other stuff. And so now when my daughter says, I think I'd like to go to New York City, I can go over my calendar and block off 2 days and we go. And she gets these new experiences and we get these new experiences together. And that is, I don't know that I would have been anywhere near that when I was working in that corporate PTO space.
That's such a good call out because
That one is huge.
we don't talk enough about the fact that even if you have PTO, you don't often take it because there's guilt associated with taking time off. So you have all
Yes.
this PTO, but then
Yeah.
you get the guilt of, well, how long can I really be out of the office before people start whispering or people start considering, do we need this person? And so
Right.
that's so huge from a just quality of life standpoint, but also
Yes.
from a freedom of life standpoint.
Well, and look, I had been with one company for about 8.5 years that had a really generous PTO policy. I got a little naive and a little lackadaisical and kind of thought, oh, that's more the norm. And so I left that organization for a bigger and a better opportunity. Only so title was better and pay was better, but I went from almost 6 weeks of time away to 2.
Yeah.
And that was at that point in my life, in my mid 40s, that did not align with my needs. And so that was something too. I kind of, not that I would have changed, not that I wouldn't have made that jump, but I do think it goes into the reality that we're all facing as we do try to grow our careers and figure out what's next, that you get kind of used to certain things. So,
Absolutely. So
and
if you
now I've gone to just all the PTO I could ever want.
You and me both. I know we were talking about that prior to this, but it's a blessing. So I love that. And obviously, huge blessings have come from this for you. If you could talk to yourself back then, if you could go back to that version of you, but with your wisdom now, what would you want her to know?
So it is funny, about 30 days before I lost my job, I had said to my workout group on a Friday morning, oh, I would never do my own thing. I don't have any entrepreneurial spirit. And don't worry, they remind me that I said that all the time. And I still don't know that I do have, like, not the stereotypical hustle culture. I didn't grow up wanting to be my own boss, right? I grew up wanting to just have the safety and security of a 9 to 5 corporate world. And that was a departure from what I had known as a kid. Um, but what I would love to go back and say, and I have said to people, is entrepreneurial spirit looks different in everyone. And for me, what entrepreneurial spirit translates to is I love that I could have 5 or 6 different clients in a week. And so everything feels different. I love selling new projects. I love going in and ideating and saying, oh, we could do this and monetizing that. And so I have never said, oh, I wish I had done this sooner, because the reality is there was a lot of things I learned over the last 4 or 5 years that are paying off and are making me credible and I'm able to leverage today. But I would love to go back to that person in the gym that day and say, ooh, redefine entrepreneurial spirit, because it might not be what you think it is.
Oh, I love that advice, especially as women. And this is a little bit of a deviation, but I think it's an important one for the ladies listening to this that think about being an entrepreneur. think being an entrepreneur as a woman looks and feels different, and we don't talk about that enough. So I love that you called that out for what it feels like for you and what it looks like for you, and being able to
Yeah.
define it for yourself.
Yeah. I also think it is different now than it would have been 5 years ago, or let's say 10 years ago. Let's go pre-COVID, just now versus 10 years. I think for a lot of us, the idea of entrepreneurial work in a gig economy is a little different. I think a lot of people are wearing a few different hats or doing a few different things. Whereas I think 10 years ago, it was, well, what is the one job you're going to have and what's that going to look like? And I don't know that that's the reality anymore. I think there are, or not for everyone, I think there are a lot of women, especially, that are picking and choosing and turning up the dial on certain things and turning it down on other things and finding success in that.
Absolutely. So, rounding this out, if there's someone listening to this who is currently going through a layoff, who is maybe fearful when it's coming, or has gone through one in the past and maybe harboring some of that emotion that comes with it, what would you want them to hear? What advice would you give them?
The thing I would do is compare and contrast who you are today versus who you are when you went through this before, if that's the sticking point for you, because you've learned, you've grown, you've built more muscles. The second thing I would do is I would encourage them to create for themselves a learn, unlearn, and relearn list. So, what is it you would like to learn about yourself or professionally in this time period? What do you need to unlearn about maybe the role or the space you were coming from? And then what do you need to relearn? What do you need to do about that in a different way? I put one of those together as I was starting the business. And one of the things I said was, I need to relearn networking as an entrepreneur. I
Mm.
need to unlearn a corporate lifestyle. And on the learn side, it was, okay, I got to get my coaching certification. I got to get those things done. But I'm getting ready. I know that that list no longer works for me. So I'm getting ready to write another one. And then the third thing I would say is there is always a better path out. You might not see it today, but something is going to be better. And whatever you do next doesn't have to be the final stage. I was lucky that I was able to go from one thing to this successful entrepreneurial experience. It doesn't work like that for everybody. Maybe your next gig does need to be another corporate role because of the benefits or the predictability and schedule. And that's okay. That is totally okay. And I think there's an element, I see this with some folks where I was able to do this in my late 40s. That's, you can't hold yourself to that same experience set in your late 20s or maybe your early to mid 30s. You've got to build up to some of this stuff. And it's okay to get there over time.
Ugh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining
You.
me in the pavilion. Such a powerful conversation. I know that somebody's going to take something from this and really transform their life with it. And that's the goal of these conversations. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Who's ready to take back their power after hearing that story? I know I'm sure leaving this conversation feeling empowered, and I hope that you're leaving with that same energy towards your layoff season or whatever it is that you're walking through right now in your life. If you want to connect with Jennifer, all of her contact information will be in the description of this episode. And of course, we'll be back next Wednesday with another story. This is a movement. This is not just stories. This is reframing the actual layoff experience. More and more people need to know that a pink slip is secretly a power move in disguise, and we're here to make that happen. Find us on your favorite social, Pink Slip Pavilion, and of course, come back next Wednesday. We'll be back with another story, and I can't wait to see you back here in the pavilion. Till then.
This pink slips the